Hello and welcome to a brand new season of The Big Debate, live from Johannesburg on S3 and the SABC News channel 404. We're also live tonight on YouTube and TikTok. My name is Tembekile Mkhototo. So, in 1994, the ANC promised a better life for all. 30 years on, in his 2024 State of the Nation address, President Cyril Ramaphosa told us the story of Tintswalo, that's democracy's child, born at the dawn of our freedom. Tintswalo was a beneficiary of the policies of the democratic state, including social grants, free healthcare, education, a house, and even a job. But do you have a decent house, a good, secure job, affordable, quality education for your kids, for instance, and even high hopes for your future? If so, then it appears you might be in the minority in South Africa today. Around half of the people in this country still live in poverty. So how lucky then was Tintswalo? For every Tintswalo, how many Dikeledi's do we have in this country? Those are people who are still crying basically for access to a better life. And you ask why and what can we do about the crisis? Well, joining us to discuss this tonight, we're joined by Zuko Kotlimpi, who's an ANC National Executive Committee member on the committee responsible for economic transformation. So apt that he's here with us today. Wanelisa Xaba is a gender activist and decolonial education scholar. We also have Azar Jamin, Director and Chief Economist of Econometrics. Mametla Sebei is President of the General Industries Workers Union of South Africa. And then Sarah Smith is the economics editor at the Mail and Guardian newspaper. We're also lucky enough to have Badi Lehotla, who is arguably South Africa's favorite and longest-serving statistician general. BEE Commissioner Tshidiso Madona, Bitumelo Molete of COSATU, and William Shoki, editor of Africa is a Country. In the audience, we have the born-frees themselves, the Tintswalos and Bodikeledi. We have activists, trade unionists, community leaders, and young entrepreneurs from right across the country. Welcome to you all. That was a mouthful, but you at home can also have your say during this hour. Does Tintswalo reflect your reality is the big question. But before we start the discussion, have a look at this.
The story of the first 30 years of our democracy can best be told through the life of a child who was born at the dawn of our democracy called Tintswalo, grew up in a society that was worlds apart from the South Africa of her parents.
Like Tintswalo, Vusi was born at the dawn of democracy in Qwaqwa in the Free State. He later attended a no-fee school and his varsity was funded by NSFAS. He is currently an engineer in training at Lesedi Nuclear Services.
Looked at myself from the shack I grew up in, you know those buckets when it rained, you hold the bucket on the bed so that water doesn't get through you. And then I realized I can also do this thing. But when they organized a program with government to take us to university, and for the first time I could leave the Free State, I was like, wow, what is this? This is the place I want to be.
But not everyone relates to the story of Tintswalo.
Let me tell you about the true story of Tintswalo. Tintswalo is a 30-year-old who's unemployed, uneducated, and probably is going to die because of the high crime levels.
Fezeka lives in Lindokuhle, an informal settlement in the south of Johannesburg. Fezeka and others in Lindokuhle have to collect water from a nearby pipe. They rely on a small solar panel owned by one of the community members to recharge their phone batteries.
Ama-challenges esibhekana nawo lana oqala nje ukuthi asina gesi, asikhona ukucharger, so uma ungena battery ke vele ke yabo ezinye izinto awukhona ukuzenza. Asina address, masifuna ukuyofuna umsebenzi, asikhoni because ayikho address awazi ukuthi uzothi uhlala lapha.
In the East Rand, we find 25-year-old Sphiwokuhle Hadebe.
Angifundi, angisebenzi currently because bekuvaliwe eThembisa Plaza ngelooting. Manje benzile balungisile abantu bathatha abantu abakuma political parties, if we ANC we EFF. If ever kune emergency situation like umuntu kumele ayothola umntwana or ulimele or uyagula, ama ambulances awangeni lapha mo phone ubash usho i-address yakho bakutshena futhi bakutshena kahle ukuthi asingeni lapho asifinyeleli futhi angeke size because i-high risk kithi uyibuza ukuthi wena ohlala kuleyo ndawo leyo bona bekuyi-high risk kubo wena kusi-high risk na okusho ukuthi wena uyisilwane na.
What are the social programs that Tintswalo accessed? Child support grants, free education, housing, healthcare, and job support. Do most South Africans have access to all these, or was Tintswalo just very lucky?
You look at the proportion of the people who constitute the middle class in South Africa by race. Amongst whites, the average is about 55%. Amongst Indians, it's 50%. Amongst coloreds and blacks, just average 23%.
Le free education abathi khona angikayiboni cela igcame ibonakale kuyenzakalele wonke umntwana yonke youth from a crash until youth umntwana like abe ne free education.
Well, I told you earlier, we're lucky enough tonight to have Zuko Kotlimpi from the ANC, a member of the Economic Transformation Committee, in fact, with the ANC's National Executive Committee. And Zuko, as you listen to those young people who say 30 years on, they've heard the story of Tintswalo during the State of the Nation address, yet their reality is so different. We've had 5 changes in roadmaps from RDP all the way now to the National Development Plan. Why has none of that worked for them?
Thank you very much, Thembekile. I just think for context as a start, President Ramaphosa was actually the first person to concede exactly the points that they are making in the State of the Nation address. He makes the point that whilst Tintswalo has had the progress that we are talking about, there are millions of young South Africans who are unemployed, who are living in poverty, and a couple of other social ills. Just one other explanation related to what was shown in the insert. If you listen to most of the people who are the Digeletis, to use your metaphor, it's people who are living in informal settlements. And one of the anomalies of post-apartheid South Africa is that there's been a growth in informal settlements. And there's something important for us to understand about that dynamic. One of the weaknesses of the post-1994 period, right, and I'm making this concession so that there's no sense that there's any denial, is that whilst there's been a growth in the preparedness to roll out the social policy interventions that we're talking about, there's been a weakness in getting the industrial economy to sort of get the people that we need it to absorb. And that is one of the major issues. The growth of informal settlements is a product of South Africa's constrained industrial profile, where people must migrate inward towards the old metropolitan areas in search of jobs. Of course, right, the capacity of those areas to produce the number of jobs that are required has been declining over time. But
much of that should have been foreseen, should it not? Especially when you consider the history of apartheid spatial planning and how that already had put certain people at a disadvantage, i.e. the majority black population, who even for those, the issue is that there's such extremes, Zuko, where you've got people who've been able to succeed and those who've simply not been able to.
And that is correct. So if we do an analysis of South Africa's economic and industrial growth performance from 1994 to now, you are probably going to agree that you have a period of 2 halves, right? We were on an upward trend up until the 2008 global financial crisis. So there was the capacity of employment creation and labor absorption that was higher before 2008. One of the major problems of the post-2008 period was that we sort of shifted gear into sort of an anxiety mode of trying to rescue what existed as the economy at the time from the clutches of the global financial crisis, and there was not much investment in real industrial growth on the other side. And that is part of the issues that the ANC manifesto now, driven by us, the Tintswalos, of course, who resonate with this problem, is trying to address. We say it's got to be industrial policy if you're going to deal with the problem.
And we'll go into the specifics of different issues affecting people, but I want to bring you in here, William. The ANC government will tell you that, you know, it's doing the best that it can within a period of 30 years, yet you've got a housing backlog north of 2 million. You've got an unemployment rate that covers about 7.4 million people in this country. Should we cut them some slack?
I don't think we should, to be frank. I think... I think that in the post-1994 period, there was a real opportunity for the African National Congress to implement policies that were socially redistributive, that were focused not just on how to alleviate poverty, which it has done by some stretch, but to try and enhance economic participation And I think if you look at South Africa now, with the large wealth inequality that we're suffering, with the large income disparities that we're suffering, that clearly hasn't materialized. And I think that periodization that Zuko talks to in 2008, that was also the beginning of widespread.
Is it that we did not spend enough, or that money went elsewhere?
As I was about to say, if we think about South African democracy as a period of two halves, the first 15 years and the next 15 years, 2008 is significant, not just because of the global financial crisis, but also because of the beginning of state capture and patronage, which incapacitated the state's ability to successfully deliver social services, which the ANC takes.
Lisa, I want to talk about students for a moment. I remember about 10 years ago, there was the massive movement on our campuses, Fees Must Fall, it was called. The government, even the Higher Education Minister, Blade Nzimande, will point you to the ANC government's willingness to move in that direction, to cover the missing middle. NSFAS has spent a lot of money on young black poor people to try and get them there. Why is that not good enough?
Well, you know, the posture of the ANC is always, we were trying, you know, the global financial crisis happened, but I think what we need to understand is that Cyril Ramaphosa will say that Tintswalo is the child of democracy. But I would argue that Tintswalo is a social experiment of a negotiated government. And so we need to think about South Africa as a nation state like a carnival. And inside the carnival, you have white people frolicking and having a good time. And then you have the ANC as the security guard at the gate. And in specific times, you will get your Tintswalos walking in through the gates. But what is required for us when we go through the gate is that we need to not tell the truth about what's happening outside of the gate. Okay.
We'll come back to that later and talk about transformation, etc. As I want to come to you, have we given business too much of an easy ride when it comes to building the country that we want to see post-1994? We talk about what government has failed to do, but has business met its social and other responsibilities to the people of this country?
There are two types of business. There are the large corporations that are the result of many years of exchange controls where the money couldn't leave the country. And there are small businesses, and the latter have taken a lot of strain. And if there is any way of actually employing people in their hundreds of thousands or millions, it is to develop small businesses rather than to concentrate on big businesses who have formed a cushy relationship with the government and organized labor, and the rest, small businesses and the unemployed, are left to fend for themselves.
Sarah, has the government of South Africa, the ANC government, has it, as I is suggesting, somewhat cozied enough too much, in fact, to business that it's unable to push it in the direction in which it needs to go to achieve the goals set out in the National Development Plan, for instance?
I think certainly the government's alignment to big business, not small business, has damaged our kind of macroeconomic policy kind of full view. We don't have a view of macroeconomic policy because we always have big business telling our leaders what to do, basically. And that means that our true north, our compass, is not going in the right direction. And at the end of the day, who benefits? It's big business. It's the elite.
Mamet, business will tell you their priority is to make a profit. Why should they care when government is failing? Why should they go above and beyond to help?
Because it's a byproduct of their policy. You see, you've got to look at what happened, right? We characterize what happened in 1994 as a counter-revolution in a democratic form, where the negotiated settlement not only tied but integrated the ANC and the black or aspirant black capitalist class it represents into monopoly capitalism. And the policies that the ANC has pursued since 1994 have facilitated unprecedented transfer of wealth from the working class to the poor. And you just have to look at everything that they've done, right? What you see in terms of lack of investment. I mean, the crisis in this country, right? It has to do with the crisis of lack of investment, both all the industrial playing in terms of investment at production side, but also at reproduction. And what do I mean by that? The ANC has failed to invest in the public infrastructure essential for raising the level of social productivity of labor, education system, energy crisis, water, the roads, the railway system, all of that is collapsing. And in turn, with the poor level of productivity and the falling returns on investment and productivity, we have seen a decline on capital expenditure in expansion of manufacturing, and in fact, a decline that has led to a massive deindustrialization, job loss.
Your assessment, Mamete, is going to drive all of us to drink tonight, so I'll give you a chance to respond later. This is the big debate. We're going to talk more about education, housing, transformation of the economy, ownership, when the big debate continues. Don't go away. The story of Tintswalo. Vusi Shabalala is a trainee nuclear engineer from the dusty streets of Kwakwa in the Free State. Now, if ever there was a person who fits the profile for Tintswalo, well, that's Vusi, and he's here with us, in fact, on the big debate today to tell us more about his experience. Vusi, if I can ask you to stand up for us. You describe yourself as someone who has benefited, right, from the schemes of this government since 1994. Do you think that happened naturally, or you were lucky?
I don't think I was lucky. I think I end up to it. I think I worked hard to meet it. And I also think that the opportunities were out there for me to go out and grab them. For one, I started using NSFAS, I used the NRF, and I used the energy SETA. So, and I always went out, looked for the opportunities. So the opportunities met the person who was looking for them.
And what about the other people from Kwakwa who are maybe your age? Did they have the same story? What are they doing now?
Some are doing internships, some are working, some are not benefiting equally. See, the thing about Kwakwa is this. We don't have like your ESCOM, so people can dream about working for them and saying, I'm going to do artisanship. Sasol is not there. They can't get internship for the railways. All the other opportunities, they say, you need to have an address where the opportunities are at for you to become an artisan or to get something, or even apply for bursary. The only way for my people to escape the poverty is for them to move to Mpumalanga or somewhere, ask a relative for an address, change the address so that they can qualify to most of the programs and most of the bursaries that are out there. You see, the thing about NSFAS alone is that it doesn't guarantee you job after finishing. But if you get a bursary, big companies offer bursaries. Therefore, those kids who has bursaries, they secure good places in good companies. When you are done with your NSFAS, you will have to look for a small company somewhere, because the big opportunities, they are already, somebody's going to enter graduate training because he's on the program of that bursary. You don't have that address, you from the shacks.
Thank you, Vusi. I'm looking for Sphiwe Buhle, actually, who we spoke to. Where is she? I'm looking for Sphiwe Buhle. Where is Sphiwe Buhle? Fezeka? Fezeka and Sphiwe Buhle are supposed to be here. I'm just struggling. There she is. Let me actually walk across here, Fezeka, because we spoke to you. Fezeka, you've been here. If I can ask you to stand. So you've been listening to what the panelists have been saying so far. Why do you think that you have not had the same luck, shall we say, as Uvus?
Okay, it's because ngicabanga ukuthi ingoba mina ngisuke emakhaya, maybe yena he's from a better place than mina ngiqhamuka kuyona.
So ubona singayilungisa kanjani?
Maybe ugovernment engaba neqiniso kubafundi.
Uchuzuko uhulumende uyavuma, they've not done everything that they can, but bayazama. Does that give you any hope?
No.
A short, clear answer. So, Fezeka Zuko says, for those who may not have understood, Fezeka says she believes she's had a harder time accessing services, some of the services that benefited Vusi, because she comes from a rural, more poorer area. But a more pointed response when I asked her if she believes that things will get better, or if she believes government's concession and what it says is the need to do more to improve a situation like hers, her answer was a simple no. Yes. Zuko. Yes. What then say you as a young person in the ANC?
And then the additional point she makes is that government, so she wants us to be
honest.
This is the point that I'm making. South Africa is a country of uneven outcomes, even for people from the same baseline. Compare someone from a village to me. When I was born, there was no electricity in my village. I went to a mud school. That's when I started grade 1. But by the time I exited the schooling system, that school had been built. There was electricity in my village. There's water in my village now. But that is not the general story of all villages in South Africa. And this is the point that I said we are conceding. There has been progress, but it is not universal progress across the board. So you do have people who are Zuko Kodlimbi from a village, and you have a person who's a Fezeka from a village. And I also made the point that people who are in informal settlements in South Africa's metropolitan areas are mostly from rural areas because of the South African migrant labor systems. May makes the point that South Africa has a problem of industrial policy. Of course, he says it's a crisis of government. We can debate that point. Okay. We'll still debate that point and enlarge it. But here's the problem. Ari says, the problem is that government has chosen the side of big business. But if you ask big business, they accuse the ANC of disempowering them to work in the way that they do because the ANC insists on a minimum wage. And that the ANC's labor regime that it insists on is discouraging government. So that is also a dishonest argument on the part of big business in South Africa. You do have an investment strike in South Africa.
Is government and business dishonest? Being dishonest?
No, I'm not being dishonest. I am telling you that South Africa has an industrial underdevelopment problem. And when big business is asked to account for it, they say it's because government insists on a minimum wage, insists on labor laws that disempower them from hiring and firing at will. Okay. And we are prepared to be on the wrong side of government on that argument. Okay. We will insist on a minimum wage, we will insist on a fair labor practice environment as part of that industrialization agenda. But if the argument is that government has shifted to the side of business, we've got to interrogate that in detail, and the claims must be made.
And I want us to deal with that when we come to transformation. I want to come to you then. We've been talking a lot about youth unemployment, poverty, lack of education, housing, piped water, etc. Zuko says, progress is being made, yes, not fast enough. What does the actual data tell us about what has been achieved and where the gaps remain?
Well, no, thank you very much. It's a world of two halves. If you look at 1994 and move towards 2011, you'll realize that certainly South Africa made big strides in services, water, sanitation, electricity, free education at primary level, and so on. That is recorded, it is true. By 2022, almost 95% of people had electricity, but they didn't have electricity. And that part was government made to make sure that nobody has electricity.
How so?
It's load shedding.
It's load shedding. And the government was in the driving seat.
Interesting you say that you say government was in the driving seat. A few days ago, the former president, Thabo Mbeki, said, well, load shedding was engineered from within Eskom. It's not because they as government slept on the job. Is that dishonest?
No. President Mbeki talks about 2008. I'm talking about the current
latter years.
then it was only 3-4 days. This load shedding is sustained for a very long period of time that destroyed industry, that made children to read under candlelight. People removed their 202 burning coal because there was a promise of electricity. When that was withdrawn, they are left with nothing. Now, let me come to the issue of education. It's the most painful. While you would see that at primary, children actually got universal primary education. You move to secondary, they drop out. So out of the 1.2 million children that are born, only 600,000 of them will go and write matric, which is a commitment that government or constitution and everybody says basic education must be achieved. It's only achieved by half the number. And those who actually manage to go to university, it's only 250. Now, if you have 250,000. Now, when you look at the progression ratio, and this is something that I thought will be screened here. When you look at the progression ratio, it's disastrous. I mean, it is a monotonic decline for all black people because the funding of education at university is this one of nitpicking, ignoring the social setting of black people.
All right, I'm trying to see where equal education is, because I want to hear from equal education. There you are, you work a lot in this space, and you've been fighting for the basics to be done in the right way. What has been the human cost of the failure to do that? If I can ask you to stand up, please, sis.
I'd like to agree with our panel member here. Our experience of Tintswalo, or rather in this case, Dikeledi, is that it's mostly Dikeledis who are being produced as opposed to Tintswalos. Our panelist member here from the ruling party did mention that he is a Tintswalo. And I'd like to put it to the audience that he's a Tintswalo not because of the government that is currently ruling, but in spite of the interventions that they have created. They are not... If we look at the throughput rate in basic education, only about 60% of those children make it through to matric. They pass matric. And if you look at the reasons why they don't actually make it to matric, you can look at in Limpopo, for example. You get school learners who are riddled, or rather faced with having to go to schools that don't have water, reliable water supply, faced with pit latrine that they actually have to relieve themselves in. It's quite problematic.
Right. So it's all linked, isn't it?
It is all linked.
Thank you for that. You're watching The Big Debate here on SABC 3, S3 and the SABC News Channel. So all our problems 30 years into this democracy still very linked. When we come back, we'll touch on something that Zuko said earlier. Is South African business on strike? This is The Big Debate. On 30 years of democracy. Now, if Tintswalo or any young South African had managed to get a good education and graduate with maybe a matric or even a degree, the chance of getting a job remains slim. Even those who try to set up businesses, for instance, say they're struggling to compete against huge companies established under apartheid, which are still dominating the economy. Have a look at this.
Poverty and limited resources, these are the remnants of apartheid that continue to shape our economy to this day. South Africa is home to over 62 million people, and yet the economy is in the hands of a few elite who control key industries and shape business decisions. A Mamelodi-based business, Tosh Detergents, has somehow managed to find its foot on the door of big retailers, but big brands are not making it easy for the new kids on the block.
When we first listed with one of our biggest retailers, we were allocated 5 stores to start off with. One of the leading brands decided to mark down their price to match our entry price. So, and funny enough, it was specifically on the 5 stores that we're in.
Meanwhile, in Capital Park, Ready Chopped Veggies is on the verge of possibly shutting down.
Over 35, you can't really get funding, but then the question is who's going to assist us?
Well, let's speak to Lufuno Rasweswe now, the owner of Tosh Detergents. And Lufuno, your story was actually quite interesting because you're saying you're trying your best to make your own money because, you know, going to the job market is simply not working. Yet, the way this economy, the structure is set up, you're unable to compete. The bigger boys are shutting you down.
Yes, I think the major challenge is that when you look at our major retail stores and when you look at our government, they use a one blanket approach. So it's like a one-size-fits-all approach in the sense that they don't consider us as businesses. There are things like compliance that the big guys already have, and we still need to come up with funds in order to be able to fund our businesses and to be able to have businesses that run. We need resources. They keep telling us that you need to employ more people, but how do you then employ or create employment if government is unable to assist you with resources? They tell you, go out there, look for the market. You find the market and you come back and tell them, we now have a market. Now what we need is resources so we can fulfill orders, and they don't come to the party. But they keep telling you that start your own businesses. We will support you and we will back you up. But
thank you, Lufuno. I want to, if you can sit for us, Botselo, I want to talk to you because you're also a small business owner, but your story, in fact, is a bit more dire, if you will, because you're actually on the verge of shutting down your veggie delivery business. Tell us why.
Well, I was, but the people of South Africa, not the government, assisted me with keeping my doors open. And I think the one thing that we also need to focus on and have more conversations with the government is that they need to maybe tame down a bit with their compliance to small business, because it's very hard then to penetrate into the market if we are not compliant. But then the other thing, again, is that if I'm a black young woman who's very easy to the eye, and you go to the government, so the gatekeeping sometimes is not even the government, but it's the people in those positions in the government.
Are you suggesting, you say young woman easy on the eye, are you suggesting that the people who run these processes, or even just pen pushers, expect something, let's say sexual favors in return?
Yes, they do. You go there, you produce, you're basically compliant, your product is that good, and instead of them giving you the contract, they promise you, I will give the contract, but let's go meet in the hotel. Why are we meeting in the hotel? Why can I not sign the contract in the office?
Thank you. So, a few things I want you to respond to, Zuko, there, based on what Lufuno and Botselo are saying. Thank you both, ladies. And what Botselo said there at the end is worrying because she's not the only one who said it. We heard it earlier when we went to places like Tembisa, where the thing about people in power using those positions to sexually exploit the poor in this country keeps coming up. Secondly, SMMEs, we're told, in this country are supposed to be the next big thing in terms of job creation and economic growth. We even have a ministry responsible, yet she had to rely on other people to save her. What does that say about government's understanding of the problem?
Okay. Let me first deal with the point she was making about the exploitation of young women. It's the most abhorrent thing that could possibly happen. And we do have that problem of people in positions of power and authority who abuse that positionality to extract favors that should not even be on the table to start with. So that's something that cannot be defended by anybody. That's the start. The second one about the relationship between compliance and small business, they are also correct on that one. And I think that's the point that as I was making. If anyone who has read the ANC manifesto now will realize we make the point that part of the big problem that we've had since 1994 is that you've been running economic policy that is not based on industrial policy. And what industrial policy tells you is, for you to grow the economy, these are your drivers of growth and therefore SMMEs. So your entire policy spectrum must be designed in order to enable them to thrive. But what you've had since 1994 is an economic policy or macroeconomic policy framework, which is what you were saying, that does not target those drivers of growth. And what we're trying to solve now is to build a policy framework that favors those ones who are going to be the ones who are pushing for growth. And but
it's been 30 years.
And it's been 30 years. And now
we need another 30.
No, we were not waiting. This is the point that I was going to make. She also makes an important point that government sometimes does not have the scale of capital required to provide as seed in order for small businesses to thrive. And that's an objectively correct point. That's an objectively correct point. So it's a twofold problem. It is the size of the funding that government has on the one hand, but also the compliance framework that people need to meet in order for them to qualify for that funding.
I see a hand over here.
And that is one of the... I see the hand as well. I see the hand.
Okay. Let's let him finish. Let's let him finish.
The only way you're going to understand what we're thinking is if you allow me to speak. So if you're going to cut me off, you're not going to get to understand what I'm trying to say.
Let's finish.
And that's objective.
Let's allow him to finish. 20 seconds.
So the point that I'm making is that on the score of the compliance related to accessing funding and on the score of the compliance for small businesses, compete with big businesses, that is correct. And that has been because our economic policy was not organized around a robust industrial policy that promotes small businesses. And on that front, the ANC manifesto is addressing itself to essentially that point.
Let me come to the BEE Commissioner, Siliso Madonna. When you look at even the latest report on transformation, even among listed companies, right? Black, women, everyone who falls under the previously disadvantaged category still does not even make up 50% of what is happening at the top of those businesses. What is the problem when we've got all of this policy, law that says, actually, we're supposed to move in that direction, but we're not seeing it 3 decades on?
I think we have to avoid a narrative of doom and gloom. I believe that there are inroads that have been made by black people. Before 1994, I could barely count 5 black business people that I knew about. Today, you probably know dozens of black people, billionaires.
The complaint is that it benefits a select few, so it's not an even spread. I think that's the problem, and we talk about it not being doom and gloom, but for someone who has to take a taxi to leave this studio tonight, it's a very different reality from those of us who will likely drive home in a German engine, for example.
No, absolutely. The policy provides different pathways to empowering. It's not one size fits all. He was speaking about corporates providing bursaries. That's part of the skills development program of the PEE.
Okay, I'll give all of you a chance to respond.
There is also enterprise and supplier development. A lot of corporates are identifying companies who are integrated as part of their supply chain. We need more and more of that. Asa spoke about concentration, the closed value chains, market access. We have to use both BBB legislation and competition legislation to open those value chains because they are currently closed. These are network of old school, closed to entrepreneurs who are looking for market access to grow their businesses.
Okay. William, I'll come to you, sir, later in the second half. Very quickly, in response to that, does that explanation make sense for where we are?
Somewhat, but I think what is fundamentally misguided about thinking and putting too much of our eggs in black economic empowerment is that it's premised on the idea that if you put black faces in high places, that's going to trickle down to the rest of the country. As recently as 2019, the World Bank released a report that showed that 10% of South Africans own 90% of the country's wealth. And the idea that if you change the faces of that 10% to make it more black and make it less white is somehow going to benefit everyone.
So good old window dressing it is.
Precisely.
Okay, William, thank you for that, William Shoki. When we come back, we'll talk solutions and take some hands from the people in the audience who I can tell you are itching to have their say tonight. This is The Big Debate. Don't go away. You're live with The Big Debate on 30 years of democracy, and we're still asking, is Tintswalo real? How do we make her story real for millions more people 30 years into this democratic promise? Send us your views via social media and on WhatsApp. Now, we're going to hear now from people in the audience on what their message is as far as this country's present and its future. Yanni Rousseau, I've got you with me. You were itching to go earlier. What did you want to say?
Yeah, indeed. The earlier speaker made the point just before the break that the government lacks money. This is the ANC government that spent 250 million rands on Kandla. This is not a government that lacks money. This is a government that has no sense of spending priorities. This is the same government that spent 35 billion rands on SAA, which is a vanity project. They should have given it away. The thing is not flying. This government is in vanity projects rather than busy with the people.
Thank you, Yanni.
So stop telling us you don't have money. Get your priorities right.
I want to hear now from the Khulumani support group. You've been very vocal about the state of this country, also quite hurt because some of you were actively involved in the struggle for a better South Africa. Sitting here tonight, uziva njani mam?
Ndiyabulela ukulifumana elithuba lokuba ndibe phakathi kwabantu abangaka abazokuthetha ngesimo se-South Africa after 30 years. Singukhulumane singama victims nama veterans apho amalungelo wethu ahlukunyezwa bathi ngesilungu human rights violation by apartheid government.
Just shortly now. Comment.
Into endivuyisayo kukuba sizomanyelwa. Silapha yabona njengoba silapha sinewari kuba ugovernment wethu ugovernment onke amaphathi wethu akakwazi ukuthini ukusondela ebantwini amamele enze izidingo zabantu. Sihleli silapha nje sinkhulumane size sathatha inyathelo lokuthi sincame ubomi bethu singogogo nomkhulu nabasashiya imizi yethu nabantwana bethu sihlale constitutional court sina 6 months la lapha sivuka pha sithini siya protest sicela ugovernment azophendula ngantoni sifuna i reparation ubuzo why i-government iyathi emveni kokuba ithathe i-democracy iyayistop indaba yokuthi i-redresse yenze i-reparation yenze i-justice kubantu abahlukunyezwa
apartheid. Thank you. So what Mamnoma Rasha was saying, what she was saying is that as the Kulumani group, what they've been doing, in fact, is basically staging a sit-in at the Constitutional Court. They're victims of the brutality of the apartheid government. They want some form of reparation, but also they're quite disappointed because they feel this government, the government of today, the democratic dispensation, is too far from the people, and they want it to come closer. I want to hear from Black Sash very briefly, if you can, in 30 seconds, Buti, and then we'll wrap with the panel with your responses. What do you make of what you've heard here this evening? Are we on the right track?
We were in the right track, but now what we are seeing, it is the reversal of the gains that we had. You said it is not a doom and gloom, but if you look at the state currently, you see the closure of NGOs that are providing to the Tintswalos in the rural areas, the looting of the feeding scheme in KZN, where now children are going back without food. So corruption needs to be addressed severely.
All right. We're going to get responses to that, and I'll let you respond at the end because you're our de facto government rep here, government rep this evening. Elisa, I want to start with you from what we heard, and I want to pick up on what Black Sash was saying. When you talk about corruption, for example, it's not a victimless crime.
What's your question?
I want you to respond, perhaps, your take on what we're hearing about how children are being affected when feeding schemes don't work, when corruption creeps into the system and adds to the suffering of the poorest.
I mean, the thing is, 2 points is I want to focus on is these people are working together. Like, I don't want South Africa to be bamboozled. The ANC and white monopoly capital are working together. And they're going to do this thing of pointing fingers while the ANC stays in power and while they exploit and loot as slave labor. But what I also want to also say is that, you know, it's like the thing that Lufuno was saying, I think is very, very important in that her government was almost closed down. However, it was the people of South Africa who supported
Can we just do something very quickly? We're going to take a quick break. We're going to assist Umama from Kuluman, Mamnoma Russia, who I think is not feeling too well. So if maybe we can just find a way to help her out so that we can attend to whatever she's experiencing. If we can get help with her, please. And then Elisa, we'll pick up with you in a moment. This is the big debate. Once we've sorted all of that out, we'll wrap. Last word from the panel when we continue. Don't go away. Welcome to the big debate on 30 years of democracy and the story of Tintswalo. We're nearing the end of our program, part 1 that is. Just to remind you, we'll continue for another hour, part 2, which will be live on YouTube, Facebook, X and TikTok. Just look for the debate or the Big Debate SA handle on those platforms. Now, before we went on the break, you may have seen that we had a bit of a medical emergency. Mamnoma Rashia, who was feeling rather overcome after recounting her frustrations with the government of today and her suffering under apartheid. I can tell you that we've been able to take her out of the studio, and there is a team attending to her. The other ladies from the Kulumani group have also gone out to be with her, but it appears nothing too serious, at least at this stage, but we are getting her the help that she needs. Now, in this last 5 minutes of the program, let's give all the panelists a chance to wrap, and I want to start with you, Masadiso, Section 27. Give us your take on what we've heard here since the beginning of this hour.
Thank you.
Yeah, you can go ahead.
So I think the views that we share as Section 27, we share what our comrade from Black Sash has said, is that there's a threat that any progress that has been made since '94 is being regressed, because as much as we say whether the question of whether government has money or not, what we're seeing is over the past 10 years, they've been spending less money on education, on healthcare. So what we're seeing, like, yes, our hospitals are underfunded, they are understaffed, and we have unemployment, we have doctors who are sitting at home, even though they're qualified, nurses who are sitting at home, but there are no positions that are available because they say there's no money left. And so this measure or this approach to not staffing and not considering the human rights of the people in this country is really just going to regress the progress that we have made.
Thank you, Masadiso. Kosatu, I want to hear the view from Labour, because oftentimes government and the private sector trade blame, but no one wants to take responsibility, or Zuko has taken partial blame, shall we say, collective responsibility. What's Labour's take?
Thank you, Temegila. I think it's really more on the industrial policy that Zuko indicated lacks in the country. And without a proper, stern industrial policy that is able to drive the economy, we will not be able to create jobs. And we will not be able to keep jobs. And these would be jobs that are sustainable. So that's very important that we work on ensuring that we evolve our industrial policy and our labor laws, actually. Because, Temegila, if you look at the electioneering right now, wants to decentralize the worker rights that have been driven by the LRA, the PCEA, and the EEA, which is the Employment Equity Act. So it's going to be very important for us to identify where it is that the gaps are in relation to pushing workers, but also creating employment for workers and young people. And as a Tintswalo myself, born in 1990 in Soweto, I'd like to just indicate that, look,
briefly,
these policies are there, they exist, they do benefit actual people that grow up to be people like me representing workers across the country.
Sarah, William, 20 seconds each, one thought each, please, as we conclude.
Well, I think industrial policy is certainly very important, but it works as a package of macroeconomic policy. And if our fiscal policy and our monetary policy is not working together to grow this economy, then, as Masadiso says, we're going to just continue to regress.
William?
I think the other side of that equation is social redistribution. South Africa achieved political democracy in 1994, but we're undemocratic economically. So I think creating a society where the many benefit rather than the few, i.e. political and economic elites, is the only way we can create a more equitable society.
Mamedra, if you can manage it in 20 seconds.
Okay. We need a revolution in this country. Capitalism has failed, and there's no solution on the basis. The ANC has complete lack of understanding for the political and economic architecture of the system that they are managing. The reality is, the crisis of industrialization is a crisis of the poverty of the black working class. You cannot have an industrialization in a situation where 10.3 million people are unemployed, many of them without any income. Secondly, the workers that are there, 75% of them are earning below 6,000 rand. Half of them on minimum wages. Where are they going to get the money to buy the kind of manufactured product that the industrial capacity must be able to produce in the And when you then have...
I did warn Mamedra that you might struggle with the 30 seconds. We're going to have another hour. I'm going to give you another shot to finish your thought. Zuko, let me come to you, in fact, as we wrap up this hour. You've heard what everyone has said, very critical of the ANC and the government that it runs. In 30 seconds or less, how do you respond?
All of them, they are correct when they say we need better policy coordination. And what Mamitlu is saying, we need industrial policy in order to deal with the poverty of the black working class. And part of what industrial policy has to do, if it is successful, is to help us deal with the inflation problem, which is the point that she's making, that if you don't have a coordination between fiscal policy and monetary policy, industrial policy is not going to work. And one of the big problems in South Africa is that government has been managing fiscal and monetary policy as standalones and not as part of a broad industrial policy framework, which is what we are proposing as a solution to deal with all these problems that are here. And all the other, my Leonard said there, my point was not that government does not have money completely.
Briefly.
The point I was making was that it does not allocate sufficient capital in order to boost SMMEs in the way in which we need industrial policy to get us going. So I was not saying there's no money at all. I was just saying so far the allocation of capital for investment has not been enough in government. But
we do have to go, Zuko.
A case to answer as well about...
We have to go, that's it. We're going to continue with this conversation with Zuko in the second hour. Make your way to YouTube, X, as well as TikTok to hear more of what Zuko and other panelists have to say. We're still talking about Tintswalo, democracy's child, and how Tintswalo has fared 30 years into the freedom of this country. This is The Big Debate. Thank you for watching. You're gonna have, I gotta remember, that was